had to start over when I came home. I didn't have a license. So the first few months I was home, I had to rebuild all my identification, copies of my social security card, because I always tell everybody the world moved on, but Steve Barnes didn't. So when I got out, I was like a 16-year-old kid again. I had to rebuild my life.
When Steve first started to work with us,
Steve got a job with Youth Build, a program of Oneida County Workforce Development. Sarah Bogart is his boss.
Honestly, I felt awful for Steve. You just have to feel bad for someone that's been in jail for 20 years for absolutely no reason.
Steve mentors at-risk youth and teaches them the trade he practiced before he went to prison.
This is Johnson Park.
Today, Steve and his kids are rehabbing a building in one of Utica's more impoverished neighborhoods.
And the kids are learning how to do tile, staining, molding. We did painting. We actually did some demolition. We tore up the old flooring, old carpet downstairs. So
Steve's doing great. He does construction with the kids, and really he loves it. He does a great job, and they love having him there.
some of them are on probation. Most of them don't have GEDs. Single-family homes. 4 or 5 girls in the program. They're single moms.
Some of them have a lot of different issues in their own lives. So to see someone who's been through all of that and is still so positive, he's just a great role model for them.
I sat them all down and I told them my story, what happened to me, and they were like, wow, So they kind of bond with me. We're on the same page, them kids,
And I think some of them, it really has shown them, if I take this route, I can avoid all that so easily.
Most of them get their GED, they learn construction, the other ones go on to college. I feel like, I help them out and I feel good about it,
Oh, he's done excellent.
Ed Lewandowski.
And it's great to have back in the area. I think he's definitely one of the positive individuals in the Mohawk Valley that, can take something so tragic that happened to him and want to make a difference,
It's got to be hard to talk about it, but in a way, it has to be good for him.
I'll be probably mentally scarred forever. It's not like it was a couple of years. I almost spent as much time on the street as I did in prison, so it'll always be in there in my mind. I'll never forget it. I'll always talk about it, try to change laws, and it's like therapy for me, I guess, to talk about it.
We have a lot of exonerees who are very active. They write op-eds, they go on speaking tours.
I went to Congress, spoke about my case. I went to Albany at the Capitol.
Attorney Alba Morales says that exonerees like Steve are the most powerful advocates the Innocence Project has.
And I think we're, as an institution, very grateful when people like Steve come out and decide that this is something that they want to devote their time to.
And so with that, I'd like to introduce Stephen Barnes.
Thank you, Larry.
He's done a number of programs that he and I have collaborated on. And
Attorney Larry Golden.
The more interested I became in his experience and the Innocence Project, the more involved I've become in the issues of wrongful conviction, to a point where last year I was appointed to the New York State Bar Association's Special Task Force on Wrongful Convictions.
The task force has proposed several pieces of legislation aimed at reducing the number of wrongful convictions. Understanding the causes is an important first step toward reform.
Probably the primary cause is eyewitness misidentification.
We as not only practitioners in law enforcement, but in criminal justice academics are beginning to learn that humans, we are fallible, we make mistakes.
Ray Philo worked in law enforcement for 30 years and teaches criminal justice courses at Utica College.
False identifications are a big problem.
Over a third of exonerations had mistaken eyewitness identification as a factor.
So we need to institute some safeguards and those type of things.
There are a lot of reforms that you can make to the process through which witnesses are asked to give identifications. Right now, you have a victim of a crime is asked to look at a lineup, and there's 5 or 6 people, and so they pick the person who most resembles the perpetrator, right? As opposed to sequential lineups. If you have a sequential array where the witness doesn't know what the last photograph is, and so they're going to look at each suspect sort of on his or her own merits and determine, is this person, is not the person. So identifications become a lot more reliable.
Steve's wrongful conviction involved incidents of misidentification, like the off-duty Utica police officer's testimony. Oneida County District Attorney Scott McNamara suggests another possible reform to the identification process.
I think the photo array procedure should be videotaped so that there's no doubt what goes on inside of that room. I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong, but we would know now that nobody did anything wrong.
Steve advocates for mandatory videotaping of all suspect interrogations.
So if you ask for a phone call, or if you ask this, and these cops can't shut the door and verbally harass you and, get crazy in there. So
absolutely. I agree with that. And we do that. That is my policy. We initially started doing C-level felonies and up. Now we try to do all felonies.
Most of the police agencies in Oneida County have state-of-the-art video systems in their police departments. So the videoing of a suspect, which would lead to a conviction, is on tape for judges and juries to see from beginning to end. There's no interruption. You can't turn it off once the video starts running. Therefore, they can actually see that there was no steering or no intimidation or no unlawful techniques were used that might result in coercion, thus getting a false confession.
It's very powerful evidence when somebody confesses, because why would you confess to something you didn't do? We do know that innocent people do confess.
10 of the 24 cases in New York State, the wrongful conviction resulted from false confessions.
It's not always, the investigating detective beating a confession out of somebody. It's sometimes, the person being worn down, the person being fed information. You look at some interrogations and everything that the suspect is saying is something that the detective has told him, whether consciously or not.
To expand on the idea of false confessions, there are also instances, like the jailhouse snitch in Steve's case, when someone else comes forward to claim that the suspect made a confession.
Somebody who's incarcerated that's selling us their story for a favorable disposition, that has to be videotaped. I believe that's where we need to be, because those are the people that are most likely to exaggerate and lie.
And they talk to him to this day, and he's like, I never testified. I don't know nothing.
Which then leads me to believe that guy might not have been totally truthful if he doesn't even remember testifying.
And sometimes witnesses lie for other reasons, like the gas station attendant in Steve's case.
3 days after the murder, he said Steve drove down towards the bowling alley. Then he changed his story and said he was going down towards Mohawk Street.
And he admits that he lied. Unfortunately, we can't prosecute him because the perjury took place more than 5 years ago. The way I understood it, Steve had a girlfriend at that time, and this kid started to date her, and he felt that if Steve was in prison, I guess he didn't have to worry about it.
Another cause of wrongful convictions is faulty forensics, what we call junk science. This was an issue in Steve Barnes's case.
The gene imprint found on the side of Steve's truck.
Really? Fabric? Unless you're going to point me to a database of all of the denim that's ever been produced in the world, and here's how often this particular, occurs, that's not science. That's some guy looking at an imprint and looking and it's like, yeah, they look the same. So what?
The similar hairs, the similar soil samples.
He didn't say there was anything particularly distinctive about, there's, 2 bushels of this dirt in the entire universe and they're only found, in this location. And it just seemed so on its face absurd to me that somebody would compare dirt samples and just say it matches.
With all the best intentions, sometimes law enforcement gets tunnel vision and they tend to zero in on a particular person and fail to look at the totality of the circumstances and the potential for other people to be involved.
It really was that the police, right or wrong, had their man. They didn't care if they had the right guy as long as the case was solved. I mean, there was so much commotion to solve this murder. It really was.
It's easy to go back and second guess what people did years later. And trust me, I realize that every day I do my job, that someday, 20 years from now, someone will be second guessing what I did.
Even giving the benefit of the doubt to every single prosecution witness, I didn't see how that led to the conclusion that Steve did this. I was a trial attorney. You have faith in the jury system. It's what you sign on to do. And to see it fail that miserably is a little disheartening.
The reality is that even though you have all kinds of protections in the criminal procedure law, there always has been kind of a feeling on the part of too many jurors that because he's being prosecuted and because he's there and they're putting in this evidence against him, he must be guilty, otherwise he wouldn't be there.
In that time period, it's so much different than it is today. With all the CSI shows that are out there, it's just a different world. And the general juror has a different knowledge than they did back in 85.
The paradigms of investigations clearly have changed. Looking at how cases are done now, I believe that there could not be a conviction based on the evidence of those standards. Once again, the paradigms have changed in those 20 years considerably, mainly because of the advent of forensics and forensic evidence such as DNA.
The problem is, how do you give Steve back the 19 years of his life that he lost? That's the sad part.